off there, and it just so happened my uncle, an Air Force captain, was an ROTC instructor in his first year at the University of Colorado. He just returned from Vietnam, where he'd flown forward air control operations out of Da Nang Air Base. And he got a hold of me and said, why don't you give ROTC a try, and if you don't like it, you're none the worse for wear. And I did. And I never came up with a good reason for getting out of ROTC. And you know, as I advanced through the university, the desirability of getting a commission grew stronger as I was aware that that draft was getting closer to me all the time. I was the vice commander of the ROTC wing there, and had my office blown up. They drilled into the offices were in the stadium, and we had little isinglass windows that were kind of in between the steps and the bleachers. And somebody drilled a hole in and poured gasoline through, and the vapor kind of filled the room, and then tossed a match in and ignited it. It was just a a sporty course walking across campus in uniform. As it turned out, it was probably a good thing I was an ROTC, because my number came up fairly soon in the drawing of the numbers. And I took a commission on the 26th of May, 1970, out of the ROTC program, and was given an assignment to the 1030th Auditor General Group office at the United States Air Force Academy. You know, most people join the military to see the world. I grew up in Colorado Springs. They parked me right in my mother's backyard. Yeah, but I was only there for 11 months, and then I got orders for Vietnam. And I shipped out for Vietnam in May of 1971, and was based at the 1030th Auditor General Group office at Cam Ranh Bay Air Base in Vietnam. The audit function is not a very glamorous function, but for a young officer, I got exposed to more parts of base operations, nosing around and getting in everybody's business, than many people get in a full career. I was only in Vietnam for 9 months. The job I had basically was focused on closing down air bases and monitoring the program action documents that govern the transition and transfer of logistics, supplies, equipment, things like that from United States Air Force accountability over to the Army of Vietnam or the Vietnamese Air Force. And so I was traveling around the country a good bit. September 1971, I was at Phan Rang Air Base on TDY, and Captain Pete Raskins came and grabbed me, and he handed me a message, and he said, I don't know how to do this to you. And it was a message that my sister's husband, Captain Ramsey Vincent, who was an Air Force Academy graduate, class of '66, fighter pilot flying A-1 missions out of Nong Kham Phanom Air Base, who had shot down and killed. And the family had requested that I bring his body back as escort officer, and the Air Force approved it. So I got on an airplane and brought the body back and carried it to the Oakland Army mortuary facility. And I can recall sitting there in Oakland, and I was feeling miserable. Family said, why don't you go down and just get out of, they were preparing the body for the transport and burial. And so I rented a car and I drove down into the heart of San Francisco across the bay. And I was sitting there in Ghirardelli Square down by the wharf, seeing all these couples walking arm in arm, and I was just feeling lonely as the dickens. I don't know if it's a God thing or not, but I looked up and I saw 3 young women coming toward me. One of them I knew. She was in the Angel Flight with the ROTC detachment at the University of Colorado, Kathy Fitzpatrick. And she came up to me and said, Mark, what are you doing here? And I'm sitting there in my uniform, the only guy in all San Francisco probably in a uniform that day. And she was a stewardess for Western Airlines. They were shooting a promotion, so they grabbed me and said, you're not going to be alone anymore. And took me with them and took me to promotion for the Western Airlines that night and got me through that visit until I was able to carry the body on to Colorado Springs for burial at the Air Force Academy. You know, I was questioning a lot of things at that point, but nevertheless, a few days later I had to get on an airplane to go back to Vietnam. And I didn't get closure when I was able to go to Phnom Penh, but I was able to talk to a fellow who had been in ROTC with and gone through high school with, who was an intelligence officer at Phnom Penh, and find out what had happened. And the good news for the family was it was an Air America, a CIA airline helicopter that was in the vicinity, and was able to get my brother-in-law's body out. Otherwise, he'd been missing in action, because this was over Laos that he was shot down. And he was in the number 2 aircraft going through a low valley, and the number 1 aircraft made it through. By the time my brother-in-law's aircraft went through, the anti-aircraft guns had the azimuth and the range, and hit the aircraft and went wing low, and when they ejected, they went into the hillside. The slots for the type of work I was doing were being taken out of Vietnam and moved over to Thailand. So the fact that I didn't have a wife and kids waiting for me, I said, why don't you let me carry one of those manpower authorizations and I'll take it over there to Thailand for the last 3 months of my Southeast Asia tour. So they said, why not? And so I packed up, and didn't take a whole lot to pack up, you know, and went to Royal Thai Air Force Base in Thailand for my last 3 months in Southeast Asia. For a young man who had kind of a narrow exposure to the world before the Air Force, that was a wonderful experience. I'm none the worse for wear for having been in Vietnam. I say that knowing that I also have been exposed to Agent Orange, and now I deal with Parkinson's disease because of that, and I can get back to that. But what I'd really like to share with those who might be listening to this is that Vietnam was a growing experience for me. I saw the world, I saw the fact that people of different cultures still have basic needs, wants, hopes, and desires for themselves and their families, just like I have. And that they were suffering because of the conflict, but they also had a beautiful country. So what was an idyllic assignment for the first 3 years, or last year, I had to have my family ready for evacuation. My kids were going to school at Diablo Heights, which was across the highway from the air base, and there were a couple of occasions where they got separated by riots in between, and their freedom of movement got more constrained, and harassment of Americans was picked up. But what made it meaningful is it was the first time I was really involved with operations. I was getting called out to battle staff on a far too frequent basis. You know, I had responsibility for the fuel farm and had thousands of barrels of JP4 and Jet A1, jet fuel and petroleum products. And bad guys were out there putting feelers in, trying to find ways to penetrate that. And you know, I'd be getting called out, but it was a time that I felt like I was really part of the military, because you know we were in a wartime footing, basically, without a wartime order. Turned out the Panamanians had the support of some of the Cubans, and as that last year progressed, we started the planning for Just Cause, which I left the country before that occurred. But the groundwork was being laid by our logistics planning office for the reception of all the aircraft and the munitions and things like that had to come in and support that operation. That was the invasion of Panama back. It started with some stealth fighters coming down and bombing Torrijos Airport, and Navy SEALs taking control of the small airfield down by the embassy, and all that was precipitated out of some of the logistic planning that we started with in the shop that I was responsible for. So I kind of have a vicarious feeling like I did something that helped that successful outcome. They took out Noriega, and Panama is back to having democratic processes today. I went up to Ellsworth Air Force Base in Rapid City, South Dakota, and took command of the 44th Comptroller Squadron. It was an experiment the Air Force had with embedding, giving squadron responsibilities to comptroller, and including within that squadron responsibility was the base contracting office and the base logistics planning office. So I had 2 years as a commander, and a squadron is equivalent to an Army battalion on the organizational chart. And command was an experience that I treasure. It was frustrating at times, amazing what shenanigans and trouble some of those young people could get into, and trying to find the right balance between kicking tail and being nurturing was one of the challenges that I sometimes succeeded at and sometimes failed at. I wish I could say I did it right all the time, but I didn't. I'd only been at Ellsworth for 2 years when I got a call saying, "We'd like to send you to Hawaii." Well, Hawaii. And they wanted me to go be the director of cost and management analysis for the headquarters Pacific Air Forces. What they didn't tell me was they were trying to get me out of the way because the general wanted to have, one of his boys wanted my job at Ellsworth, and so they were working back channel. They didn't tell me that the job that they were offering me in in Hawaii, was destined to be closed out. And so I felt like I'd been a little bit of a pawn. So I had to find my psychic income through things other than the military. And I did some good work when I was there. But it was a different promotion opportunity, different rating. And so it turned out I went from definitely promote below the zone recommendation to promote in the zone, and I didn't get promoted to colonel. And it was certainly disappointing. I didn't spend 22 years doing something that I didn't think I was shot at it. But this side of it, I can see how things work out. Because it got me started into a second career that was very rewarding at a much earlier point than it would have. Had I stayed on put on the colonel rank, I might have spent another 4 to 6 years in uniform and traded off age against marketability. But what was then called Westark Community College here in Fort Smith, the president was a retired Army officer who was sympathetic to that military experience being transferable to higher ed, and he gave me a shot as his vice president for finance and administration. And I've had a wonderful second career, in a large part because I think the military trained me up in ways and means that were extremely beneficial to the world I found in higher education. I'm proud of my service. There are parts of being in the military that I still miss. I know I can't do it anymore, but I think it's honorable. You know, the military, putting on the uniform of this nation is a tremendous responsibility. And one that has rewards, not necessarily financial rewards. You know, I was comfortable, but I didn't get rich in the military. But I've got friendships and good memories, and had some great experiences that I look back on with fond memory. And I think it's a noble profession.